Episode 14 of the Bmoney Beastin podcast. I'm here with Steve Carpenter. Steve Carpenter is the trainer at Ringgold High School. He's been there 26 years. He was there when I was there about 377 years ago. I spent a lot of time with this guy. I had bad knees. I tore my shoulder, broke my hand. Like I was duct taped together by the time my senior year came around. Dude, I interviewed his son about a week or two ago. Really impressive kid. But now I get to – this is going to be a really interesting conversation, especially in the sport of wrestling, considering that he's been around the wrestling program there at Ringgold for nearly 30 years. He's dealt with all kinds of injuries, and he can explain these in ways that we can't. Okay, my knee hurts. I don't know what that means, but this guy does. So it makes it a really interesting dynamic here. Dude, so by the time I came around at Ringgold in – I guess I was there 03 to 07, right?
Yep.
So by the time I got there, how long had you already been there at that point?
I got there in the fall of 99.
Okay.
So I was 28 years old. I'm 53 now. So majority of my life, you could almost say. You know, it was kind of a transition period for Ringgold because they had just really started to get the funds and the direction and other parts of leadership that they needed to have to, you know, do all their facilities like they have now. From a wrestling perspective, that was Billy Broom's first year as head coach. He had been assistant coach under Steve McDaniel, wrestled for Steve McDaniel at Ringgold. And Coach McDaniel, man, everybody loves him in Ringgold. You know, that dude's a good dude. He's like the grandfather of wrestling in North Georgia, you know. Okay. And, Billy wrestled for him, and then he was first year head coach. And, you know, previously, before I got to Ringgold, I was in Paducah, Kentucky for 3 years. And you know, as part of my job as an athletic trainer working, you know, for a therapy company out there, you know, we did cover some wrestling, but not to the extent, and they didn't have the focus that like Ringgold had when I got there, you know, so I kind of like that.
Yeah. Like, you know, when I was around, you know, Phil was at the middle school. And then, of course, he went to the high school and had a lot of success. And then the year before I went into high school, you know, that team they had, that freshman class that ended up doing a lot of good things that was ahead of me.
Yep.
You know, that freshman class was stacked, man. You know, you had like Garrison and Rob Baker and Greg Hopkins and Tyler Mills scored a lot of points. You know,
and Andrew, you know.
Yeah. There was a lot of kids in that freshman class. And I kind of feel like, in a way, the next couple freshman classes are going to have 2 or 3 pieces in each one that are kind of coming up. You know, Paul Grant's son's a 7th grader.
Yep. Yeah, I saw Paul a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, dude, I love that guy, man. He taught me how to hit a baseball when I was in 8th grade. I was terrible at it. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
His son, though, man, that kid's going to be really good long term. Long term, he's going to be really good, man. Like he's a tough kid. He's kind of emotional, but that's what happens at that age, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm seeing it happen. He's kind of emotional.
Yeah.
But like Bryson did that, dude. When he was in like 5th grade, he threw his headgear, hit this like 90-year-old woman in the face, like at state one year.
Yeah.
He was so pissed off, he turned around. And then Matt Pitts, I'll never forget as long as I live, he grabbed him by the back of his singlet, right? Like both straps, picked him off the ground and walked him to the back of the arena.
Yeah.
So
you know, my wife always told our boys, Seth and Luke, you know, and Seth wasn't as emotional as Luke, you know, when they were younger. And but she always told them both, she was like, if that ever happens, she was like, you won't have to worry about your coach because I'll be dragging your butt off the mat, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you know, Perler, when I was interviewing Nick Perler, he told me, he said, there's part of their structure of how they do things is they literally practice how to walk on the mat, how to walk off the mat, how to carry your body language, like things that most wrestling coaches don't even think about, right? Like that are crucial. He said he had 2 kids from Missouri that ended up wrestling at Oklahoma. Basically, they got attention from a college coach because of how they handled a loss.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's really a unique kind of idea that like things we don't even think about, you know, hey, this kid's good at a single leg or this kid, you can't keep him down on bottom or whatever. That's what, you know, people in wrestling look at. But you don't look at like the little things that add up, you know, to big things.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, I think the next like 2 to 3, like our freshman class now has a few hammers in it, and the sophomore class has a couple kids. And then, you know, I think it's gonna I know that it's been what, a 16-year drought in state championships, which
2008, yeah.
Which is kind of I don't understand it, because there's always been athletes at Ringgold, right? Yeah. There's always been athletes. And I've said this before too, and I just posted a video this morning about structure, right? That's the biggest thing that I see in any successful program. They're very structured.
Yep.
Right. And I feel like you can't rely on, now the training centers are a great thing. We go, you go, everybody goes to the training centers. Yep. But not every kid's going to be in a training center.
Exactly.
It's not feasible. So, okay, how do we fix this? Well, you got to build that from within, and you got to stick to it. And I think that if you look at successful programs, like Rockmart's won 3 straight state championships or something, right? 21, 22, 23, whatever it was, and 24, maybe 4 in a row. And the one thing I see all the time is they got kicked, and they even got kicked out of their wrestling room, dude, like at the school. And they had mats laid out in a Baptist church, and they had 30, 40 kids going every week.
Yeah.
So okay, that's how you do it. So, I can preach it. Somebody's got to listen to me.
Well, but, you talk about structure, and I think that's one of the things that, like, when I first got to Ringgold with Billy, Billy was very structured. He was tough. He was tough on the kids, but he was fair. Okay. He understood they were kids, but at the same time, there was an expectation that he laid out. And this is my expectation, and they worked hard. Now, obviously, I mean, in order to win, you have to have a lot of components. You have to have some talent. You have to have kids that are developed to a certain level. But then you have to have some leadership that is holding them to that standard, and that's one of the things that, like I said, Billy did really, really, really well. And, in 2002, when we won our first state title, they had been second numerous times under Steve McDaniel. And, when they won their first title in 2002, I mean, everything clicked. I mean, we had the kids, the Keefs were seniors. Josh Flynn was a junior. Barrett was a junior. We had all these different components of kids, but man, they worked so hard. I think that year we put like 6 in the finals, and 4 of them won.
Steve Hamilton told me that one time. He said, he's been at Dalton now for 2 or 3 years, I guess now. And we were talking one day, him, Bryson and Billy are like best buddies, right? And, whatever. And I was over there one day, they were like practicing together or something. And I was sitting there on the porch with Steve and we were talking about it. He said, dude, the recipe to win a state championship is you need to get at least 6 in the final. And he said that. It's funny you brought that up. He said 6. And if you can place about 4 more, top 6, you're scoring enough points. And those 6 placement points is going to push you over for a team title. And, when you got guys, like you were just naming off like a bunch of killers, right? Like one of them, Michael went on to be a NCAA All-American at Chattanooga. So, you got some killers there. And, you look at that, the biggest thing now, I feel like the biggest challenge for especially high school coaches, college coaches, like Matt Pitts told me a few weeks ago on the podcast, which he's told me this over the years. He's like, Terry, and Quantal's told me this too, because I didn't know this until last week or 2 weeks ago. Matt confirmed it. He said that Quantal had the worst year of Terry Brands at Chattanooga.
Yeah, I saw that clip. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, he had the worst year. And he said, dude, they'd come in one day and he'd just be like, hey, be on weight tomorrow. We haven't wrestled in like 2 weeks. Yeah, be on weight tomorrow, like 17 pounds over. So all these guys are up till 2 in the morning and they go to practice the next day. So like college coaches can do that, but high school coaches, it makes it a lot difficult, right? Because like right now, we got 3 kids in our room that are probably like, 120 pounds, right? So who's going 15, who's going 6? Then you got, 2 or 3, 4 kids like in that range that are like, 165 to 180, who's going here, who's going here. And that's a difficult thing in a high school realm, right? So that's why you have to have everybody to buy in. Okay, this is about the complete program. Okay, you're going to do this, you do this, you do this, and it's going to help everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a challenge and a lot. But if you have enough kids like you were talking about, those 6, 8, whatever you named off, all those guys were bought in.
Yeah.
I think that's half the battle is just to get everybody to buy in. And I think we're into a spot here at Ringgold at this point. Derek's done an amazing job at the middle school.
Yep.
And I think that we're finally to a point where wrestling's becoming more and more prevalent in our area yet again, with like the opening of like Minion, and Grindhouse has been around, and you're starting to see local teams place top 10, top 5 in the state. So let's tell me about, you spent a lot of time, and I did too. What was your thoughts on Phil Daniel?
Man, I love Phil. I really did. Phil and I got along really, really well. You know, he always respected my opinion on things, and I always respected his opinion on things. You know, I think as an athletic trainer, you know, especially in the high school level, one of my core beliefs has always been, you know, coaches coach, athletic trainers take care of the injuries. And if you and your coaches both see it that way, then it makes things easier. You know, it makes things easier from my perspective, because I can say, hey, listen, this is what they got going on. You know, what are you seeing from a wrestling perspective? You know, and then they can say, yeah, this is what we're seeing. This is what we're seeing the kid have difficulty with. You know, and then you can discuss, like when a kid has an injury, let's say he's got a shoulder injury, and we can say, listen, we really want to stay out of certain positions. You know, we really on bottom, you know, maybe this kid needs to drill a lot more to get a lot better at getting up, you know, and not giving wrist control, you know, because once you get the wrist control with a shoulder problem, you probably are going to have some issues with a better kid on top, you know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and Phil and I were always like that, and Billy and I were always like that. You know, Billy and Phil were both they were both dudes that were very very loud, very excited, very I wouldn't say emotional, you know, because they did keep their emotions in check, but man, they got worked up, you know. And you know, so having both of those dudes, I thought there was a lot of similarities between them. Now I know they butted heads on certain things, but man, I thought there was a lot of similarities, you know, between them. And I think the biggest similarity between them was, man, they both worked the kids hard. You know, they worked the kids really hard in the room. And we, during those years, like from 99 to let's say 2008, man, we probably had more injuries in the room than we did at matches.
Oh,
you know, just because kids going so hard, you know, and to me, that's kind of that should be more of a typical thing, you know, and it shows that you're working your kids to a level that when they get in tough matches, that hopefully they're not getting in positions where they're subjected to injury or more at risk for injury.
You know, for something funny, we're going through, you know it, you've been involved, which the shoulder seems to be improving, you know.
Yeah.
But dude, the way that happened, like I've never said this publicly to anybody. I don't even think I've told you this. The way that happened, we wrestled, Bryson wrestled Jose Cordero.
Yep.
And they had a banger of a match. The match before he got injured. Okay.
Yeah.
And we had already wrestled. This is because it was a 2-day tournament, 2-day duel. We'd already wrestled like 4 times the day before. We're on like our 8th match or something at this point. And 9th, 10th, I think he was like 8-2. So we were like, I don't know, 9, 10 matches in, whatever it was. And, you know, it's at this point, you're wrestling a match about every 2 hours. So you get there at 7, you know, to warm up, 7:15. They start wrestling at 8. At this point, it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's been a long day already. And I'm sitting on the bench, you know, had the chairs sat up and whatever. And me and Harrison Murdoch and Billy and Jackson Delgado are sitting in a line watching this duel. And right off the rip, you can tell he's tired. This kid from Florida just blasts Bryson, right? Like, right off the rip, blast him. He gets taken down. He looks over and he smiles. And I'm like, what the? Like, okay. He gets a reversal, so now it's 3-2. And then he puts the kid on his back. So he ends up going up 9-2. And then he gave up a reversal. He got high. So it's like 9-4. And he's winning the match. And he got reversed. So he goes down. He gets through the first period. Second period, he's on bottom. And, when you're a middle school kid coming up, 2-2 is a long match. All of a sudden.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, even that 130, when you were transitioning from 1 minute periods as a youth kid, that's a long match. And now it's even a longer match. So it's about halfway through the second period. and you can tell he's like stalling, right? Like he's just trying to get through the second period. He's like, I know if I can get to the third, I'm gonna beat this kid. I just got to get through the second period. And dude, he looks over again, and it's almost like his ADHD just kicks into like high gear, and he's like smiling. And then that kid that got pissed off because he couldn't turn him.
Yeah.
And that's where he threw that bar in and like tried to rip his shoulder off.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things. I'm like, dude, sometimes kids get so wrapped up in the situation they're in, whether it be, hey, my buddy's here, this is funny, whatever. And that ended up being something that was very preventable, that just due to the situation, Jackson was kind of agging it on too, right? So it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, look at this is hilarious. So he just kept it up, and then he got hurt from it.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things where it's like, you kind of got to be, a little more safe, careful type things,
and more focused on the task at hand.
At that point, like you could tell, like he was done. He was cooked, know. And that's one of those things. And those duels, man, they're long and drawn out, and it's like anything. Last year at Super 32, we waited like 4 hours in between matches. You really think you can go from being down for 4 hours to get back up to wrestle like your best? I watched kids up there last year, man, kids that are killers that like are barely squeaking by or getting upset because like, that time period in between, it makes it tough, Dude, I want to, you got an awesome thing here that I want to hear. People would want to hear. I didn't know you were I've known you for 20 years, right? I've never known that you were from Chicago, right? I never knew that.
Yeah.
Luke told me that, right? Yeah. A few weeks ago. And he said, yeah. I said, how? I was like, how did he end up from Chicago to Marshall? And how did like that scenario there? How did you get from Chicago, Illinois, where the only thing I could picture from Chicago, because I've never been there, is like Shameless. You ever seen Shameless?
Yeah.
So that's like the only thing I would think of, Chicago, or the Bears,
Yeah.
Sammy Sosa, I think of Sammy Sosa when you think of Chicago.
Yeah.
But like, how did you end up from Chicago, Illinois, to Huntington, West Virginia?
Well, I
took that major.
I took an intermediate kind of step. So, I went to grad school at Marshall. My undergraduate was University of Charleston in Charleston, West Virginia. Okay, so they're a D2 school. When I was there, they were an NAIA school. My sister actually landed there the year before I did. And she was a design major and really liked it. So I went down there, on a trip to check out the school in probably like early January, my senior year in high school. Played soccer. I ran track, played soccer in high school. And, I had an opportunity to go there and try to play some soccer, plus my sister was there. I was young, man. I was 17 when I graduated high school. I turned 18 over Thanksgiving break my freshman year in high school. So I played an entire collegiate soccer season at 17 years old. So I was young, immature, and not quite as strong. But having my sister there and it being a small school was like probably the best thing for me. Because I was a kid. And I grew up in an area. Growing up, I didn't miss a party. I didn't, but you're growing up in Chicago. It's not like, the opportunity's there to hang out with your buddies and somebody's always having, some kind of bash when you're growing up. So, so getting away from a bigger city, getting to a smaller city, getting to a smaller school, because there was probably about 500 less students in my college at Charleston than there was in my high school. Because I went to a big high school. It was like 2,500 kids or something, or 2,400 kids. And, so that was a good transition for me, because I got personal attention there, the class size was small, and from a major perspective, I was like, all right, sports medicine and athletic training. I was familiar with it. We didn't have athletic trainers when I was in high school, but I was familiar with it. And, so I was like, yeah, I'll give this a try. And, just ended up enjoying it. ended up liking it, ended up finding that I understood, the concepts. I understood, the course load, and so, I just lucked out for me that the first thing I kind of threw a dart at, from a major perspective in college was what I ended up doing. So I graduated from Charleston. Knew I wanted to go to grad school. I didn't want to get out, and work yet. So I wanted to continue my education. And a lot of my professors like, yeah, go on to get your master's. At that time, most programs, athletic training was an undergraduate program. It's a master's degree program now. So a lot of people like myself went on and they served, 2 years or so as a graduate assistant, at a larger school. So I was a graduate assistant athletic trainer working on my master's at Marshall. My primary responsibilities, those 2 years I was at Marshall were soccer and baseball. And, those are two sports that I really like, so that worked out well. And there's still two sports I really like. In Marshall and Huntington and Charleston are like 50 miles apart, so it wasn't that bad. It wasn't like it was a big jump. I had applied to a few other schools. I applied to a program at University of Illinois, applied to a program at Ohio U, and Marshall was basically the first one that came through with an offer as a GA. And, so I was able to get my master's paid for, which was nice. I had to live poor for a couple of years, but I was okay with that. It didn't matter. I was, young dude. It didn't matter, Marshall's where I met my wife. So we, she grew up, Southern Ohio, just outside of Huntington. And, so she was kind of local, and, that's where we met and started dating. Actually got married before we even graduated, so we didn't even date that long before we got married, and we've been together, almost 32 years,
That's amazing.
And 5 kids later, so it's kind of a little bit of a roundabout way to end up, in Huntington at Marshall. And we stayed there after we graduated. We stayed there 2 years. So I was in West Virginia a total of 8 years, left Chicago at 17, West Virginia for 8 years, ended up a little detour to Western Kentucky, and then I landed, here in Chattanooga, at Ringgold High School. So,
okay. I know I said before we started recording, I wanted to hear the Randy Moss story, and we can say that later.
Yep.
But now you got me really intrigued, right?
Yeah.
How did you go from, like, I've heard a lot of your stories over the years, but I've heard it in clips.
Yeah.
So this part I don't think I ever knew. How did you end up, you stayed in Huntington for 2 years, and then you went to Kentucky for 3 years, you said, right?
Yep.
How did you end up from there to, of all places in the world, Ringgold, Georgia?
Well, it was, it's kind of, again, it was kind of almost a little bit by chance because, we were in Paducah, Kentucky for a little bit over 2 years. And, I mentioned to my wife, and we had our oldest son at that point. He was born in the middle of that 3-year stint. And, so we were talking about, what we were going to do. And I was like, well, what do you think? I mean, do you think we should buy a house? We've been here a couple of years, I was settling into my job, and she was like, oh no, I'm not living here. She's like, I'm not living here for the rest of my life, and I was like, all right, well, I got to start looking for another job,
Right.
So, shortly after that conversation, the guy that ran my undergraduate athletic training education program at Charleston was down here at UTC. He was the program coordinator of the graduate program. His name was Joe Beckett. He was the program coordinator at UTC. And he, out of the blue, calls me one day, and he's like, "Hey man, I'm leaving UTC. I'm going back to Marietta, Ohio." He's like, "I got to get closer to my daughter. I'm way too far away from her, so I got to get closer to my daughter." And he's like, "I'm probably going to have a couple positions. Any chance that we can meet and just talk about what your interest might be?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, because in 2 weeks we're going to be in Florida, and we're going to be driving back through that area to get to Kentucky. So why don't we just stop and talk at that point?" So we stopped and talked and had a good dinner with Joe and talked to him about what he had going on, and kind of left it, informal, like, yeah, we'll talk more, and the next morning we wake up and we just start driving around Chattanooga, and we're like, man, this place is actually kind of nice. We kind of like this place. We like the hills. I mean, Paducah's flat, and I grew up in flat, but Southern Ohio is not flat. West Virginia, is not flat, you know.
No.
So we like the terrain, we like the city, you know, we liked a lot of things that had going on. And so we get back to Kentucky, and I start just looking. And on one of the job boards, there was a job at Hutchinson, which was Hutchinson Medical Center there in Fort O.
Right.
And two dudes that I went to grad school at Marshall with were there.
Oh, wow.
You know,
That's
so
intense right
you know, I reached out and I was like, yeah, you know, what's up with this job? And you know, within a week I was interviewing, and within another week I'd accepted a job. You know, and then we were moving. You know, so again, it's just kind of things just kind of fell into place, and you know, we had a young child, you know, and we knew we were gonna hopefully have more kids, and we were really looking for a place that, okay, we want to settle down. You know, we didn't want to live in Chicago. She definitely didn't want to move back home. So we're like, we just got to find a place that is kind of like a mid-sized city that has things there, you know, but isn't like a large metropolis. You know, like I love Chicago. I love where I grew up. My neighborhood was awesome. You know, my dad owned a house there for 52 years. You know, he just passed away this past spring, and my sister and I are working on getting ready to sell the house. And, you know, it's like, you know, every time I go back there, and I've been back there 7 times this year, you know, because of all the stuff with my dad's house. But, you know, as soon as I get back there, I feel at home, you know, but at the same time, you know, I was like, yeah, I really didn't want to live there. You know, growing up there was awesome. There were so many advantages to growing up in a big city. But at the same time, you know, we were kind of past that. We didn't really want to be in a huge metropolis. So, you know, and I think things worked out real well with where we're at.
Yeah, man. Like, and here's something else though. You live, like, people that see this that don't know our demographic, like the area geographically here.
Mm-hmm.
You live on the Tennessee side, and I live on the Georgia side,
Yep.
which is literally on a connecting road, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So, and it's a back road, and it's literally, there's a high school. There's 2 high schools that are what you want to say 6 miles apart between East Hamilton and Ringgold.
Yeah, it's like 8 minutes. You know, I had to rep both. I had to rep East Ham right here.
Yeah,
you know, and Ringgold. So
yeah, and they're literally in 2 different states, about you know, less than 10 minutes apart.
Yep.
And what's wild to me is you've been at Ringgold for 30 years now, damn near, and dude, you live right on the other side of the line. And like, was that planned? Did you plan to stay in Tennessee? Was there a reason you didn't move to Georgia?
Yeah, well, I mean, we, you know, when we first got there, you know, when we were first moving in, we were looking at different areas. You know, my wife took a job, a large hospital system here, which she still works at, you know, same hospital system I now work for, you know, so, you know, that changed. You know, I stayed at Ringgold, but the hospital system that was managing the contract and the care changed. And, you know, so she took a job. She's an RN. She took a job there right away. And, you know, we kind of settled in Tennessee, and part of the reason we settled in Tennessee or Chattanooga rather than like Ringgold or something like that was, you know, a little bit of a larger city. There was a little more opportunity, a little more options for where we wanted to live. You know, we were in a duplex for a couple of years before we decided to buy a house. We bought our first house in like 2001. And when we were looking at buying a house, we had looked at Georgia too. You know, we looked at Ringgold, we looked at a few different places. All right, where do we want to be? And you know, just a lot of different factors that factored into, okay, let's stay in you know, let's stay in Tennessee where we're at. Let's stay in Chattanooga. And you know, we liked, you know, Alec wasn't in elementary school yet, but we liked the zone that we were at for his elementary school. You know, and you know, we had, man, all of our kids, Ian just finished there. He's in 6th grade now. And man, we spent 21 years at the same elementary school with all of our kids.
Did they all from the standard?
Yeah. They all went to East Hamilton. You know, they all went to Westview Elementary. They went to Westview Elementary.
Westview, yeah.
Is right around the corner from East Ham.
Yeah.
You know, it's right there in the intersection. So, you know, and you know, it just, you know, there were a lot of factors that kept us in Chattanooga rather than, you know, going across the border to Georgia, you know. And then things have worked out well. You know, Luke gets a lot of questions from his buddies like, man, why isn't your dad the athletic trainer here? You know, and he's like, well, he was the athletic trainer at Ringgold before there was an East Hamilton High School.
Well, you know, Yeah.
And East Hamilton contract used to be managed by different facility, a different corporation rather than what I'm employed by. But since like I think 2017 is when our hospital system, picked up Hamilton County system. And but for me it's been would it be great to have my kid wrestling where I'm at? Yeah, I think it would have made things a little easier, but probably the next best thing is to have your kid like 10 minutes up the road.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been at Ringgold long enough that, I mean, there are times like last year we had a basketball game at Ringgold, and they were presenting Luke at a wrestling match in East Ham for his 100th win. And so literally, man, I sat there for a JV basketball game at Ringgold. Told the AD, Lee Shell, I was like, dude, I'm running up to East Ham real quick so I can be there for his presentation for his 100th win, and then I'll come back. So, I'm busting tail up Ooltewah Ringgold Road, and and this isn't the first time I've done this. I do this a lot, and literally I'm at the stoplight and I'm taking off my Ringgold pullover and I'm putting on my East Ham pullover, and then pulling in the parking lot, go in there, we do the presentation, I give him a hug, good luck today, buddy, back in the car, put my Ringgold stuff back on, bust tail down Ooltewah Ringgold Road back to the next basketball game. And
so like Clark Kent and Superman.
Yeah, exactly. And that happens a lot, man, it really happens a lot. But again, I think, everybody at Ringgold has been super supportive of me, needing to see my kids. And it's not just Luke, but, it's other kids that have other activities, they've been really supportive of me, hey, I'm bailing out and then I'm coming back, and it's just, the schedules the last couple of years, like yesterday I was sitting down looking at Ringgold wrestling schedule, Ringgold basketball schedule, East Ham wrestling schedule. And, man, I'm probably going to get to see Luke wrestle 35 matches this year, maybe 40, and which to me is like awesome.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's going to be some dates I miss, but that's just part of the job. I mean, that's, I think a lot of people miss some things that their kids are going to do, because of work, so I'm no exception to that. But, I'm fortunately in a situation where it's close enough that, I'm going to get to see a lot of stuff this year. So,
it's a great thing that you're such in a situation that you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, Luke's, even though he don't go to school with the Ringgold kids, he has a relationship with them too.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing too. Like, we see him, I guess, twice, 2-3 times a week or whatever,
yeah.
Club and whatever. And you've been such a major staple in our community, right, forever, that in terms of, he's got his friends at East Hamilton, whatever, but since you've been such a big staple in like the rest of the Ringgold wrestling, Ringgold football, whatever, he's got this whole other demographic of kids that has kind of like gravitated to him through you, which is also for long term is a great thing,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Whatever. And dude, I was so impressed with him. I talked to him for, I want to say 40 minutes. Okay. And the one thing I brought up was the Spider-Man singlet.
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, where did that come from? Are you I've never seen that. That's pretty cool. Cause we even did an episode, me and Bryson on the podcast about different singlet designs. And I had never seen that one.
Yeah.
And he said he got it off Rudis.
Yep.
And he said that they only had so many of them or whatever it was. And I'm like, dude, that's really cool. And then we started talking about, well, are you like just a massive, Spider-Man fan? And we started going down this rabbit hole of, hey, when I was a kid, I watched Spider-Man 3, 100 times in a row, like all this stuff. And it was cool because, Bryson and Luke have a relationship. They're friends.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that because when Bryson was little, he was obsessed with the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah.
And he had an Incredible Hulk singlet. And, Bryson and Luke would never have met each other had it not been through you, right?
Yeah.
They probably never met. And if they seen each other like at Minion or something, you know, not every kid in there talks to each other, right? They just do it when you get out, but they have a relationship. So I think the position that you're in is a great thing, not only for the Ringgold kids, but for the East Hamilton kids and for your son. I think it's a great thing. I want to ask like two more things before I get you off, and you can go get you off the podcast, and you can go fix people and all that.
Yeah.
The first one I want to ask is, since this is a podcast about wrestling, what are the most common things that you typically see with wrestlers, and what are some things you can do to prevent it?
From an injury perspective, from an orthopedic injury perspective, shoulders are probably number one. We see a lot of what's called impingement syndrome, which is, basically, the bursa and one of the rotator cuff tendons, underneath your collarbone, where it attaches to the shoulder blade or scapula, that area tends to get inflamed and impinged a lot with anything where you get an arm over your head frequently, and obviously wrestling is one of those. We do see a lot of labral tears. And that's probably one of the more severe ones. And some of those happen because of shoulder dislocations. Some of those happen, chronically, just from wear and tear on the shoulder from a number of years. So, to me, and this is one thing I was kind of, after we talked about me being on, this is one of the things I've given some thought to the last couple of days is, to me, one of the biggest things that young wrestlers can do. And one thing, knock on wood, Luke stays healthy this year. But one of the things that I put him on, when he was young, like middle school, is starting out and getting your shoulders strong, and that's a fairly dynamic thing. It's not about just benching, or it's not about just doing pull-ups, but those things are important. It's about isolating the rotator cuff muscles and getting them strong. It's about isolating the muscles in between your shoulder blades, what we call the scapulothoracic muscles, and getting those strong. And so, looking at that, it's like, there's a lot of information out there on the internet. And I see a lot of wrestling guys, a lot of really top level wrestling guys talking about their stuff that they do for shoulders and everything. And there's some good information out there, but to me, it's being appropriate for where you're at. So, you can be a good wrestler and have some shoulder problems, and maybe you can't do the advanced stuff on your shoulders yet. Maybe you got to start out with the basic stuff. And so it's not being afraid to start out with the basic stuff, so working on shoulder strength from what's called an open chain position. An open chain means hand in the air, and a closed chain position, hand on the floor, hand on the mat. In wrestling, we see both. We see a ton of open chain issues where your arm is in the air, and you see a ton of closed chain issues where we're posting on the mat. So being able to strengthen from the perspective of wrestling specific things, there's two things on Instagram that I follow, and I respect a lot of their opinion. One of them is a PT in North Carolina. I've never met him, but I respect a lot of the stuff he does and says, and I've shared a lot of that stuff, with coaches out at Ringgold, and that guy goes by the PT Initiative, on Instagram, and I think he does a really good job of having a variety of things that he shows from a shoulder strength perspective and from a rational perspective. And then there's another group of I think there's 3 guys that do this, and they're all physical therapists, and they call themselves the prehab guys, and they've got an Instagram and other social media as well. And I think they do a really good job too. And one of the things that I usually recommend to people is, if you're going to go online and look at stuff and look at shoulder health stuff, stick to the more rehab specific, therapeutic specific programs first. And then maybe you can branch out to what, like, some of these top level dudes are doing for their shoulder strength, because they didn't start out doing what they're doing now. They started out at a much more basic level. And I think a lot of times kids skip that basic level. And if you skip that basic level, man, you're not necessarily setting yourself up for failure, but you're setting yourself up to where your progression isn't going to be what it could be. We got a wrestler at Ringgold right now, and I'm not going to mention any kids' names because I don't like to talk about injuries, but he had an injury previously, and I kept slowing him down, and he was a little frustrated, and I was like, dude, you just got to trust me. Trust me, slow down, we'll be fine. and he seems to be doing great a couple years later, and it's not that I have like, the magic advice. I just try to look at things and say, okay, what's going on with this kid? Where are they at? And what level do we need to start this kid at? You can jump in and start a kid way too high on their rehab or shoulder strength, and they're not going to benefit like they would. Or you can even start them out too low, and not progress them fast enough. And then their progress in their strength is limited. So shoulder strength, in particular, rotator cuff strength, is probably one of the biggest things that you can do as a young wrestler to try to, one, avoid injury, but two, it's going to have a performance benefit. Strength has a performance benefit, without a doubt.
When it was interesting you said that when you were talking about like what level you should start at in terms of trying to gain strength. That's the same thing as like technique, right? When you take like a beginner wrestler, like, are you gonna try to teach them how to run a spladle, or are you gonna try to teach them how to be in a stance? You're gonna try to teach, a basic stand up. You're gonna give them fundamentals, and that works both ways. Man, the last thing I'm gonna ask. We've been on here for 41 minutes, which has been a great conversation, dude.
Yeah.
I love talking with you. I want you to tell if anybody that watches this is an overall sports fan, right?
Yep.
And I remember sitting with my torn up knee when I was like a sophomore on your table, and I was like kind of down, and we're just kind of sitting there together, and you told me the Randy Moss story.
Yeah.
Which I forgot quite a bit of it over the years. I tried to pass it along, but I think anybody that sees this would love to hear about what you know about the Randy Moss story.
Well, I mean, clarify, I don't know Randy, but the story is kind of cool. Right. We had a brief intersection in time, you could say. Right. As part of athletic training education programs, you go out to different places to basically clinical experience. Like nursing programs, you go to the hospital for clinical experience, doctor's appointments for clinical experiences. In athletic training, you get a lot of different types of clinical experiences. And when I was in undergrad, and it had to be, I think it was like my junior year, maybe. It might have been even my sophomore year, but I think it was my junior year. And one of the places that I rotated out to, and I wasn't out there very much, but I rotated out to, was DuPont High School, in West Virginia. And, we were there for, I think it was a JV game. So he was like a freshman, and, he busts a long touchdown. And I mean, he was smaller than most of the dudes out there, but you could tell, man, he just had athletic ability, and I asked one of the coaches, I was like, man, who's that kid? And they're like, yeah, his name's Randy, man. We think he's going to be pretty good, and he was, but you look at that kid and I mean, in general, I'm a Randy Moss fan. I spent a lot of years in West Virginia. I went to Marshall, and he ended up at Marshall the year we left Huntington, which was at like 96. And I kind of followed his career a little bit in high school when I was in college, and some of the troubles he had, fortunately he had some people that believed in him, that gave him some extra chances, and sometimes that's all it takes, is some extra chances, to make something right with your life. And, but it always kind of cracks me up that they're like, yeah, we think he's going to be pretty good, and yeah, he was, fantastic. So,
got Hall of Famer,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
To close this off with the Randy Moss thing, the other day I seen Jason Williams. He played for the Kings.
Yep.
He was Randy Moss's quarterback.
Yep.
In high school.
They played basketball together, and he played basketball. And Jason ended up playing basketball at Marshall.
Okay.
Yeah.
The great thing he said was, he said, I played in the NBA, and in high school, I was Mr. Football.
Yeah.
And Randy Moss played in the NFL, and he was Mr. Basketball.
Yeah.
So, like, that was kind of, to me, pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Steve, dude, this has been great. Like I said, I had a great time interviewing Luke, about 2 weeks ago now. I think that kid's got, he's got the mindset to be very successful. And
I think so. Yeah.
I will say this. If right now, as it stands, if I had to pick a kid, I would pick Luke over my kid. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even lying. I would. And I told Bryson that the other day. I was like, dude, there's more to wrestling and being successful than, you're pretty good at it right now, but you don't do the other things the right way.
Yeah.
Like, you're struggling in other areas.
Yeah.
I was like, right now, this kid does everything the way that you would be ask of him. And when he told me he had a 4.0, I was freaking blown away. And how he spoke to me, it just added to that. I was like, dude, this kid's really smart. Yeah. And, I've seen him in wrestling rooms and I've seen him work hard, and he's got a work ethic on top. Obviously, if you got a 4.0, you got a work ethic, right? Yeah. Like right now, my big dog there, he's struggling in algebra, right? Like, yeah. Every day I get in there and it's like missing assignment. I'm like, bro, like I'll text him like, when you have a kid like that can, and I was talking, like I said, I talked to Bedard. I was like, hey man, you need to just go look at this kid. I was like, he started a little later than most, but he's improving right now. I said, he's got a good, well-rounded head on his shoulders, and he's one of those kids that will be there, give you everything you got. And that, I look forward to seeing what's next for him, and I will always follow him. Like, I feel like we have a relationship now, like we kind of bonded. And dude, like, I can't rave enough. Like, you and your family, y'all are amazing people, and you've done an amazing job with that kid. And dude, you deserve props, you and your wife, because you raised an amazing young man.
Well, I appreciate it, man. He's always been a kid he's always been an athletic kid. I mean, from the moment he was little, he was an athletic kid. And middle school, he was a 3-sport athlete. He played club soccer, he played middle school soccer, he wrestled in middle school, he ran track, and he had some success at all those things. And one of the things I always told him, I was like, and my wife and I agree. We're like, we would love for him to choose wrestling, but at the same time, man, we wanted him to choose something he wanted to do, right. Because that's the only way you're going to get kids that really put the effort in, is when they're 100% are in, they want to do this, And I told him, about 8th grade or so, maybe even freshman year in high school, I'm like, dude, there's going to be a point where you're going to have to choose probably, I was like, but that's going to be up to you. And I've seen, coming up in, kids coming up to Ringgold, I saw a lot of good athletes that by the time they got between their sophomore and junior years, man, they chose, they're like, yeah, I'm just going to focus on this. I think this is my future, and those kids primarily were correct. So, toward the end of his freshman year, he was running track and he really wasn't feeling it anymore. I mean, he always loved it, but he just wasn't feeling it anymore. And, he still loves soccer, but at the same time, he's like, Dad, I just love wrestling. He's like, I think about it. He's like, I wake up in the morning and I think about it. But that was evident because he would wake up in the morning and he'd get 45-minute workout in the morning. He's an 8th grade freshman year in high school, and, he's doing push-ups and dips and crunches and planks and everything else, and so he's like, man, I think I just want to do this, and I'm like, if that's the kid's choice, I think that's the best thing. I think a lot of times as parents, we get caught up in what we want our kids to do. And my philosophy as a parent was always, I want my kids to be productive people. I want my kids, they got to do well in school. And my wife has always cracked the whip on them doing well in school. Some of them, like Luke was more of a self-starter and independent kid. She didn't have to crack the whip on him as much. Some of my other kids, they had to be pushed, but always pushed them in school. And then from their activity wise, man, it's like, well, what do you want to do? We're not rich, but we can afford to give them some opportunities, and so it's like, my opportunity as a parent or my responsibility as a parent, I always looked at it as give my kids the opportunities that I can afford to give them from a financial and from a time perspective, and that's been my wife's, philosophy as well. And unfortunately, because of my job, a lot of it's fallen on her shoulders, from the time perspective, but, we both try to do as much as we can just to try to put our kids or give our kids the opportunity to succeed in life, and with Luke has always been one of those kids, man, that he needed something physical, something athletic, and would I like to see my son wrestle in college? Absolutely. I would. I'd love to see him continue to wrestle, but it's not just because I'm a proud father that likes watching him wrestle. It's because I know my kid, and I know that if he does something athletic or physical or physically difficult in college, it rounds him out, It's one of those things that just resets his mind, and I think he has done better in school because of wrestling, not in spite of wrestling, you know. And so if I had advice to parents, man, it's just, really, really let introduce your kids to a lot of things and let them kind of figure out what they're good at. And as they figure out what they're good at, and you kind of dealt with this with Bryson, he decided not to play football, he decided wrestling, well, that's, and I was a soccer player when my kid decided to, and I ran track. And when he decided not to play soccer and not to run track, I was like, man, I kind of like these things. So, but at the same time, I was happy that, he was choosing what he wanted to do and he was putting the full effort into it, and again, he's the biggest difference between my two kids that wrestled in high school has been Seth was a good high school wrestler for our area, region runner up, 2-time state qualifier. But he didn't do a lot of the things out of the room,
right?
But that's okay because he got out of it what he wanted to get out of it.
True.
It's not about me and about my wife and about us wanting him to succeed and wanting to feel proud parents at state or whatever. You feel those things, but it's about, he got out what he needed out of it. And it helped him grow, and it helped him grow through adolescence. It helped him be a stronger, more confident individual. And so, it was a success for him. Luke needs different things out of wrestling, and he's a different kid, but he's been that kid, man. He comes home and literally, if he's going to Minions that night, he goes to the Y and works out after school. He tries to get his homework done during his study hall and man, goes to the Y, works out, comes home. If he stays for school practice, because they're practicing in Tennessee, you can practice, right now. And, so if he stays for school practice, he comes home and he might do a little bit of homework. And then, man, I just, he's got an over the door pull-up bar, and I just hear that thing just getting worn out every night, And again, he's just one of those kids that is going to do those things outside of the room. But that just lines up more with what his goals have been.
It's interesting you said that because all kids are different.
Yep.
And like you see, when you got a kid that's a self-starter like that's easy to deal with, right?
Yeah.
Like my son individually, and Sean Russell said this a few weeks ago. He's like, Bryson likes to wrestle. He don't want to work out.
Yeah.
He goes, I was the exact same way. He said, I'll wrestle all day. I don't want to work out.
Yep.
If you look at the past 4 or 5 years, he'll jump in the weight room 2 or 3 days here and there, and he'll work hard. But he don't care. He wants to wrestle. When you have a kid that can balance things just like Luke does, dude, that's a quality that not every kid has.
Yeah.
And like I've seen, like, I won't name a name here, but there's a kid that we've known since he was 5 years old who's probably top 10% in the country, right?
Yeah.
Like he's a stud. Kid will go wrestle, and he'll wrestle hard or whatever. And he's so good that he overcomes a lot of things and doesn't have to do as much. Does that make sense? But he ain't doing any extra if he don't have to, right?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, like all across the board. So you have kids that are, the kids that do rec, and then they're in middle school doing middle school, and then they're in high school, and then some of them end up being fortunate and being able to be athletes in college. Every time you take that step, it's less about what happens at practice and on the mat and on the court and on the field, and it's more about what happens off of those things. And so you got a good middle school wrestler when they get to high school. If they're spending a little bit of time in the weight room, spending a little time conditioning, spending a little more time thinking about what they're eating, they're gonna have more of a chance of being successful. When you get to college, man, those things are mandatory. That's now the baseline.
Yeah. Matt did said that. We were talking about it, and I was talking about kids and like over competing and things like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, like we told the Super 32 story because, like, I don't know if you even heard this, but last year at Super 32, Bryson got beat 5-3, and what put him out. And it was a pretty good. It was an okay match. I don't know,
Yeah.
But he Granby rolled. Pitts was in the corner. He Granby rolls, and he's on his side, so he's not on his back.
Yeah.
And the ref's over here, and he starts counting back points. He can't even see where he's at, and he's counting back points.
Yeah.
And we argued it. All hell broke loose, right?
Yeah.
And he was pissed and whatever. And we were talking about that. And I was like, dude, like in that scenario, that's hard to swallow, right? Because you work so hard and you cut so much weight. And he goes, dude, that's mandatory.
Yeah.
He goes, you signed up for this, right?
Yep.
And he said Terry Brands would tell him that all the time, regardless where you're going. You signed up to make the weight, to do the training, to work hard. Like you signed up for it. So it's a mandatory thing. And if that can correlate down to the high school level, which in some instances it is, you got these private schools where a lot of that shit, you know, it's like, this is what you're going to do. This is not an argument, debate.
Yep.
So like, if that starts, and I even said this morning, structure, right? That goes back to structure. And dude, as far as I can tell in the past, you know, I've been involved in this now with him for like 9 years. Luke very well may be one of the most structured kids I've ever ran across.
I would agree. Yeah.
And dude, I think that in his long-term development, he will get an opportunity somewhere to wrestle. I have no doubt in my mind he'll make the podium this year. I have no doubt.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I mean, his improvement on the mat, you know, last year he made tons of improvement on the mat, you know, and I started seeing him, you know, one of the biggest things that I saw him is he was now wrestling through stuff. He wasn't just bailing. Oh, I don't want to give up back points. Let me give up my 2. You know, he was wrestling through stuff and he was calm. And I remember, you know, he lost a 4-2 match. It was a fantastic match to, you know, kid that ended up 3rd. You know, good match, good wrestler, you know, and he loses that match in a blood round, you know, and of course he's upset. He's like, man, Dad, he's like, this is terrible. You know, and I was like, yeah, it is. I was like, absolutely it is. He's like, I worked so hard. I've done so much. He said, I've wrestled better than I ever have. I put in more time than I ever have, you know, and he's like, and I wasn't able to meet this goal. And I told him that moment, 5 minutes after he's already lost, you know, I told him, I said, Luke, you know, I said, sometimes the timeline for our goals doesn't match up for what we think it should. True. And I was like, dude, you lost this match. And did I want to see you place for a 3rd time, you know, at state? Yes. Did I want to see you place jumping from small school to big school? Absolutely. I did, you know, but if you look at, say, place versus get better, dude, I'm choosing get better every time, you know, and he got so much better last year. And I told him, I said, dude, I said, the things that you've done this year, I said, if you continue on that path next year, I said, you were going to be a totally different kid.
100%.
You know, 100% different kid. And, you know, we saw a little bit of that with Seth, because like after his sophomore year, you know, he didn't qualify for state. He was disappointed. We thought he was going to. And, you know, I was talking to Cooper and I'm like, dude, what do we got to do? And he's like, get him down to see Pitts at Grindhouse. So we would spend about 3 months in the spring, and that changed him. Now, he didn't do a ton after that, but just that little bit of time of being focused, being in a room with kids kicking his tail every single day, you know, changed him. You know, and I've seen the same thing again with Luke, you know, but, you know, it's like sometimes our goals, you know, we have these goals, man, but they didn't line up on that day. And that's okay. Because we're going to keep working toward those goals, and they're going to line up at some point.
You know, I don't know if you know this kid. You know James Severs? Have you heard that name?
I've heard the name. I don't know him.
He's he was a Minion kid growing up. He's a couple years, maybe a year older than Bryson. I think they were on some Minion teams together years ago. Well, he was a freshman last year at Social Circle. Okay, and he was state champ. He won state and all that. He won NHSCA a couple years ago now.
Okay,
this kid, and I think at one time, him and Bryson may have been tied for the most state runner-ups in USA Wrestling Georgia history, right?
Yeah.
And I think Severs didn't even win one until he was an 8th grader, right? Like I may be wrong. He may have won 2.
Yeah.
His dad's a great guy. They're great people. But dude, like everybody puts so much emphasis on like, and I'm guilty of that too, right? Like, like now we want this right now. And then you kind of see like development. And I'll just say this, like there was like, and Bryson hadn't competed right now in 8 weeks because he hurt his shoulder or whatever. But his last time he competed, there's about 6 or 8 of those matches that a year ago he'd have probably lost, right? Like that he probably would have. And the kid we have right now is only going to improve more throughout high school.
Yeah.
He's got so much like, and this is any kid, right? Like, so like what you do as a youth kid and like your development stages, there's never going to be a college coach that how many U state championships did you win?
No, exactly. Yeah.
How many times did you place at, Tulsa, right?
Yeah.
whatever. So like, that's what I was telling Luke. I was like, man, nothing behind right now matters.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I tell Bryson that. It's like none of the BS you've done, you've done some cool stuff, but none of it matters.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter now. Now it's what you do from here to next. Like you just got to keep moving forward. And that kid has a great way of handling that and like looking at that. And whenever you have that self-starter mentality, dude, I'm just so excited for him. And I'll probably at some point did Ringgold and East Hamilton aren't going to wrestle, are they?
Dude, all right. So that's a little bit of a sore spot with me, man. I've been trying to get Moss to wrestle them for 8 years, 4 years with Seth, and now 4 years with Luke, and he just won't pull the trigger, man. Coach Mountain actually, he reached out to me a while ago. He's like, hey, see if we need a team for our dual tournament in January. See if they can come. And I sent Moss a note. And he's like, yeah, I'll look at the schedule. Crickets. So I'm gonna call out Moss right now, man. He just needs to. I never understood why East Ham and Ringgold don't, not just wrestling, but don't compete against each other in like everything. I can understand football because Tennessee and Georgia are on opposite 2-year schedules.
Right.
Okay. So that makes it difficult, and so I get that. I get varsity football. Yeah, we're probably never gonna line up, but everything else, I'm like, dude, the schools are 10 minutes apart.
Absolutely.
The gate for all of those events is going to be fantastic.
Oh yeah.
And
I think in wrestling terms, I think you could call it border war. And it could be like something like that. If you look at college football, like Minnesota and Michigan have theirs, and then you have, the Iron Bowl, Alabama and Auburn. You could turn that into like the border war. And it's like a yearly in-season duel. And, maybe like the Catoosa Cup, right? You got Lakeview Ringgold Heritage. Every year, maybe it goes back and forth, right?
And forth.